Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. I welcome the opportunity to share my experiences on September 11, 2001. I've thought about September 11th and those who we lost every day for the last 2.5 years. To truly understand what happened in New York City on 9/11, you need more than simply the recounting of events. You also need to understand the people involved and the magnitude of the situation they confronted. Enough time has passed that I feel we have lost the true sense of that day and the days that followed. The hundreds of New York City firefighters, police officers, EMS officers, Port Authority police officers, OEM responders, and other first responders who rushed to the World Trade Center deserve our praise and unyielding gratitude for their courage and dedication in the face of the greatest disaster in this nation's history. Their sole purpose that morning was to save lives. They put themselves in harm's way to help those in need. That is what firefighters do every day. That is who they are, and we have to make sure that their bravery and valor is fairly and properly represented in this process. The enormity of the circumstances that morning must also be kept in our minds as we examine the events of 9/11. Two of the tallest buildings in the world were on fire, tens of thousands of people were inside, and the largest rescue operation in history commenced in a matter of minutes. The scope of this catastrophe would multiply exponentially to a scale never seen before by first responders in America. As much preparation, practice, and experience as we had, nothing could have ever really prepared us for what happened or how fast the events would unfold. I say without hesitation that the men and women of this city, rescue workers and civilians alike, did a phenomenal job that day. When I arrived at the scene in North Tower, the lobby was relatively calm. It was a combination of control and chaos that is characteristic of a fire scene. In accordance with our standard practice in high-rise fires, the chief officers were sending units to gather information, staging the firefighters, and developing a strategy and tactical approach. The first units that had arrived were already climbing the stairs to establish personnel and equipment staging areas on upper floors. Others were waiting for their orders. More firefighters and chiefs were arriving all the time to support what was expected to be a very long operation. The units had been dispatched in response to Chief Gansey's call for a fifth alarm, the highest level of mobilization in the fire department. Then the South Tower was hit, approximately 9:03. Chief Gansey called a second fifth alarm. Chiefs Burns and Palmer went to the South Tower to set up a third operations post to manage the response there. Instantly, the largest and most difficult rescue operation ever set in motion doubled in size and complexity. The rescue operation was in the hands of the most seasoned and practiced fire chiefs in the nation. They had done hundreds of drills and responded to thousands of emergencies. They knew how to take control of a crisis and how to make the critical decisions needed to save lives. Simply stated, they were the experts. No one could have done a better job. Did they know everything they would have liked to know? Not at all. As I said before, you have to remember the circumstances they were under. 2 fifth alarms within 15 minutes was unheard of until that point. It wasn't a case study or a tabletop drill. It was real, it was fast-moving, and it was horrifying. What they were able to accomplish was extraordinary. Though we suffered great losses, thousands of people were saved. And I have no doubt that they did everything they could to ensure the safe evacuation of those buildings by both civilians and firefighters. On a technical point, it is important to understand how the fire department works when fighting high-rise fires. We had 3 command posts because we needed 3, and we located them where they were needed based on years of best practice. The chiefs needed to be as close to the operation as possible in order to understand on an ever-changing basis the needs of the operation. They must be able to evaluate the situation instantaneously to make crucial, time-sensitive decisions. We have heard civilians in the building say over and over how much it meant to them, how much hope and security it gave them to see firefighters going up the stairwells as they were coming down. Let me speak for a moment about the communication issues on 9/11. There were problems with communications. Nothing worked at all times. Everything worked sometimes. Cell phones, the point-to-point department radios, all alternately worked and didn't work. The unprecedented circumstances had an understandable impact on communications. One of the biggest problems was the amount of traffic on the radios that day. Firefighters normally use their radios to talk to each other point to point. They do not go through a central dispatch, and that is very important in an operation. Firefighters need to be able to talk to each other about the conditions they are facing at the scene of a fire. The downside is that due to the limited number of channels available, only one transmission can be made at a time, and it limits the use of that channel by another firefighter. With hundreds of firefighters at one operation, the radios were overwhelmed with competing transmissions. In the communication industry, this is called stepping on each other. We had never had an emergency operation of this size. We had not had this difficulty, this extent. this difficulty to this extent. We also know there was difficulty with the repeater system in the towers. Like everything else, it worked and it didn't work. Some chief used it for some of the time, and some did not because they had tested it and didn't appear to be working correctly at that point. What matters most is whether the radio and repeater difficulties had a significant impact on the operation or on the evacuation of the buildings. It is, of course, impossible to know the definitive answer to that question. Anyone purporting to have the definitive answer is being less than honest. We do know that evacuation orders were given, both before and after the South Tower collapsed. What we will never know fully is how many received the evacuation orders and how many did not, how many continued the operation despite the orders, or how many were on their way out but just didn't make it in time. We've heard the evacuation and Mayday orders on tapes and on videos, and both civilians and firefighters have stated that they heard the evacuation orders. We know that firefighters and other emergency rescue personnel passed on these orders to each other. We know that some evacuated and that some did not receive the orders. To understand all this, it is important to understand what it means to be a firefighter. Firefighters do not run away. They do not leave if they think they can stay. They will not leave their brothers. This, of course, is not to say that firefighters were able to evacuate or in any way less courageous or dedicated. It means simply that, as it has always been with firefighters in the New York City Fire Department, when faced with critical decisions, firefighters do what they believe the immediate situation requires of them. For many firefighters, an evacuation order means get the civilians out, get all my guys out, and then I go. One team on their way out may have stopped to help some injured civilians. Another team may have just cleared a floor and escorted the civilians down. We will never know what decisions many of our firefighters made that day, but I do know that firefighters do not abandon civilians in distress to save themselves. Without question, I wish so many more had evacuated. The emptiness from the losses that day has never left me, not for a moment. I've been asked to comment on the FDNY radio situation before 9/11. When I became commissioner in 1996, the department had already been moving towards upgrading their radios to an interoperable interagency system and switching from analog to digital. Our analog radios had limited frequencies available. The upgrading process would allow us to acquire more channels and better technology for interagency coordination. In March 2001, we gave all the units the new digital versions of the radios. Although the radios appeared to be the same, the digitals performed differently from the analogs. There were some problems reported in the field, and safety concerns were expressed by the firefighters and the chiefs. I immediately recalled the digitals and had everyone go back to the radios they were using before. One of the reported problems with the digital radios was that messages transmitted simultaneously canceled each other out. The transmissions were stepping on each other. We planned to re-release the digital radios after we had thoroughly investigated the problems reported and provided the units with more extensive training on how to operate them more effectively. I have also been asked to discuss the coordination between the Fire Department, Police Department, and OEM. As for OEM, it was critical to the coordination of rescue and response. There were OEM representatives in the North Tower lobby and at the West Street Command Post from the very beginning, and they provided crucial information to the chiefs. While the loss of the OEM Emergency Operations Center at 7 World Trade Center made communications and coordination more difficult at first, those difficulties were overcome. I've always thought that OEM was an excellent concept, and the agency was very important to the Fire Department. It provided operational support and resources we would not have otherwise had. At an emergency, we're able to concentrate on rescues and fighting fires. We could rely on OEM to make sure all other concerns and issues were taken care of, either by OEM or through other agencies. The events of 9/11 have had a profound and permanent effect on my life and the lives of too many others. While I have never been more devastated, I've also never been more proud than I was of the men and women of the New York City Fire Department on September 11th. I asked the Commission to carefully consider how it explains and represents the information gathered about September 11th. In developing its findings and recommendations, the Commission should make every effort not to separate what was learned from the knowledge the way it was gained. To do so would be not to separate what was learned from the difficult and challenging conditions under which the knowledge was gained. To do so would be to turn the efforts of all involved into a remote analysis, devoid of the energy, the passion, and the qualities of heroism which was such an integral part of what firefighters did that day. The information must be seen in the context of the people who actually lived through the incident, with all the immediate possibilities and problems they faced. The value of the Commission's work in protecting first responders and the public lies not only in the historical account of what was accomplished, but also in how policies are formulated based on what is learned from this process. The lessons learned should be used to shape a new vision of risk management. I'm sorry, I only had one sentence to go, that's why I kept going. I apologize. I tried to beat you to it. The lessons learned should be used to shape a new vision of risk management in uncertain times. Thank you.